Will DK Metcalf rebound big time this week for the Seahawks? And should we worry about Davante Adams and his matchup against the Jets? We tell you as we break down our wide receiver and tight end rankings for week 10, only on another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. We're a destination to become the smartest fantasy football player in your league. We're part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your fantasy football team every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL, betting, and fantasy for sportingnews.com.
Hey, I'm Michelle Magdziuk, researcher at NFL Network and fantasy analyst for NFL.com.
All right, Michelle, it is time for our wide receiver and tight end rankings. I like this because I can talk about some of these matchups and coverage and all that good stuff here. And look, it's a big week here because we have a lot of key wide receivers off, especially no Dolphins, no Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle, no Eagles, no Devonta Smith or A.J. Brown. So that's bad. Rashee Rice, he might be trusting a little bit. The Chiefs are not playing this week. And the Rams, you get no Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua. So that's a lot. So you're going to hear some names maybe a little bit higher in the rankings than we anticipate for this week. We'll dive into it here. We'll also look at our tight end rankings. A lot of good stuff for tight ends this week. All right, let's start, Michelle. We both have them pretty high this week. I'm at number 4, Jamar Chase of the Bengals. Number 7 for you. T. Higgins also banged up here. And we'll see if both of them can go in this game, but they are playing in a good spot against the Texans at home. So Jamar Chase landed awkwardly on his back in that Bills game. Maybe a little bit worried that he hasn't had practice early, but I still think he'll be fine, and I think he's going to be a fine play this week. Last week was a Higgins week. I think this week is more of a Chase week.
Yeah, well, there was news yesterday. T. Higgins pops up on the injury report with a hamstring injury. So initially, I had him ranked as my wide receiver 9 this week. He's still not practicing today. Both of these guys, Chase and Higgins, were not out on the field to begin practice for the Bengals. I do feel better about Chase going and playing through the back injury. We don't know how significant this hamstring injury is for Higgins. Did it pop up yesterday at practice, and will he be out? I don't know. That worries me more than Chase. So I did feel good about playing both of these guys. Now it's just Jamar Chase. And if Higgins sits out, Chase is going to get so many targets. If Chase is in, you're confident in him. But with T. Higgins and the hamstring, that I'm worried about.
Yeah, for sure. And you look at this Texan secondary, it's not too bad. The one thing they are giving it up to, especially last week, 2 touchdowns down the middle to Cade Otton, which is interesting. The Bengals did start using their tight ends, but the problem was they used Irv Smith, they used Drew Sample, they used Tanner Hudson. So it became a committee. Look, I'm not expecting Irv Smith to have a big role here, but if Higgins is out, they might use him a little bit more, right? And Tyler Boyd, you could see Trenton Irwin getting some run here and Andre Iosivas. So these other guys were okay when Higgins were out. I think it's more by committee. So you're right. I think if Higgins is out, you pretty much have to trust Jamar Chase, just getting peppered with targets. We've seen that in previous games. And even with the back injury, I think he'll go. His injury is going to have less effect on his running and cutting and making catches than Higgins. Hamstring, we know, can be always tricky. So watch for that to develop as we go later in the week. Now, let's go to Thursday night's game. And one guy, if you're going really deep here, that could do something because of the injuries to D.A. Chark and Laviska Shenault is Jonathan Mingo, the rookie, but this is really a better matchup for Adam Thielen. Now, you have him high, Michelle, wide receiver 6. I think he'll get back to where he was before that clunker against the Colts in that secondary. I have a little bit more conservative at 20, just because I like a lot of the receivers that are ahead of him with great matchups this week, but I still think he's a fine play. And you look at this, the Bears, pretty good on the outside, but they're a zone team most often, and also have a struggle in the slot with Kyler Gordon. So this is a good spot, especially Adam Thielen knowing this former opponent of his in the NFC North.
Yeah, I'm not worried about Adam Thielen's down week last week. Every wide receiver has down weeks, and Adam Thielen hadn't had one since week 1. So it was time for him to have a down week in fantasy. He only had 6 targets when the weeks prior 13, 13, 11. Like, I think his targets go back up. The Bears have a great run defense this year, and the Panthers can't run. That means they're going to have to pass a lot. And the targets are going to go Adam Thielen's way. So I have him right back up to being ranked as a top 10 guy this week. And I'm feeling confident plugging him in.
Yeah, I think he's solid. I mean, however you look at it, probably you can split the difference and say he is a definite start this week. If he's in the top 20, you have to look at it that way. And again, I think you'll have a pretty good night. I don't expect an explosive night, but I think you'll get like 6 for 80, something like that. Could definitely be in the mix for him this
I
week.
think
And
the
maybe
difference
mingle.
between him being either wide receiver 20 or wide receiver 6, where I have him, is probably the touchdown, right? Like, if he
Yeah.
gets 7 for 80 yards, he'll be closer in the teens somewhere. But if he gets a touchdown, then he's going to be in the top 10 pretty easily.
Yeah, it could be that primetime game that we saw early in the season on Monday night against the Saints. He scored a touchdown late in that. So it could develop to be like that, right? So actually, you want the Bears to play from ahead in this one and get some garbage. We didn't get the garbage last week, Michelle, because frankly, Bryce Young was trash. So he needs to become a
Yeah.
lot better. I think he'll fare better. I mean, he can't be much worse there against his Bears defense, a little bit more favorable matchup than Indianapolis. Now, Chris Olave, look, he's a polarizing guy. He's been disappointing. He did score last week, but not a big game otherwise. I have him as wide receiver 5. You have him at wide receiver 13. 5, yeah, it is aggressive for him this week,
That's
but the
really
matchup is
aggressive.
just, yeah, very good. But the matchup is very good, and here's why. I mean, traditionally the Vikings are okay against the tight end. They're okay against running backs in coverage. So this lines up well for Chris Olave to be involved. And Michael Thomas, we like that. Get out of here. Get a 0. We want Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed to be the guys. Let's move Michael Thomas because he just doesn't do anything. He just gets a few catches and they're not inspiring. So this is good. I think you also have some opportunities to throw the ball downfield here. They're going to have to do it pretty aggressively because you do have Danielle Hunter on the other side. But when you look at this, look, the secondary for the Vikings is their weakness. He's got good matchup across the board. They used him inside at times last week, which is good to see. So, look, I actually like Chris Olave. And I also like Rashid Shaheed this week, Michelle. I think both these guys can be effective in the game where you're going to have to throw quite a bit to beat Minnesota.
Yeah. So I have at wide receiver 13, which I think is extremely high for Chris Olave.
Yeah.
He's not doing much, right? He's getting a ton of targets. That's not the issue. He's just not really doing anything with those targets. Luckily, he came down with the touchdown last week. That saved his fantasy day with just 46 receiving yards in the game on 8 targets, though. So that's the thing: 10 targets, 15 targets, 9 targets, 8 targets. Like, he should be doing so much more. But Carr and Olave are just not finding that connection. Olave is actually not finished inside the top 10 at the wide receiver position any week this season. So this would be his very first week to do it if you hit on that. Vikings defense has really stepped up. I'm not loving the play, but I do have him high because of the target share and because we know he is talented and can have a big game. But I am feeling better about this guy, I'll say. DK Metcalf, having very similar season to Chris Olave, right? Both very disappointing for where you drafted them. And Metcalf is yet to finish inside the top 10 as well. Like, he's not impressing, but I like his matchup even better, right? And I really will give him some excuses for the past month of him struggling. I mean, he was dealing with the hip and rib injury, right? And then the last 2 weeks, he's had to face the Ravens and the Browns. Those are really hard. I mean, those are the top 2 defenses in the league and points per game allowed just in the NFL, right? So I'll give him a pass for the last month. But in this game against the Commanders, giving up the second most receiving touchdowns to wide receivers, one of 4 teams allowing 40 plus fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position this year. I do think this is a week that Metcalf could put up 100 yards and 2 touchdowns because he always has those weeks in any season.
Yeah, that's exactly why you can't sit him. His ceiling is just so high, and you don't want to miss out on those games. And I think you're right. This could be a blow up game for him. He actually had a 50-yard catch in last week's game, but then the Seahawks stopped playing offense once the game was out of hand, and Metcalf disappeared along with the rest of the Seahawks. So I think that they can also, the Commanders, contain the running game a little bit. We know their pass rush has been weakened as well without Montez Sweat and Chase Young, so they should give Geno Smith a little bit more time to hang in there. They should be able to set up some play action downfield and get that going. So this is lining up well for DK Metcalf. We want to see him get in the end zone. I think that's the biggest thing, Michelle.
Yeah.
Like Adam Thielen, we talked about getting a touchdown to stamp his value. Olave did it last week. Come on, Metcalf, you can do it. You've just been very inconsistent. I think you've seen Tyler Lockett be the one that's the boomer bust game guy, where the Metcalf floor hasn't always been great. So this is the week, if any, to get him going at home there against the Commanders. All right, this is a tough one for me looking at these matchups, because on paper you would say the 49ers and Packers are not great here, but Christian Kirk is someone we like this week here. We both have him at wide receiver 14, so just outside the wide receiver ones in 12-team leagues. Then we're kind of simpatico on Diontae Johnson as well, 15 and 17. So we're right there saying these guys are going to be pretty darn good wide receiver twos this week. Kirk, look, the matchup is good. You can beat the 49ers in the slot. That's been proven all season long here, and that's the weakness of their team. He has a better matchup than Calvin Ridley does on the outside. Speaking of better matchup away, George Pickens doesn't have the great matchup, I don't think, against Jair Alexander. I think Alexander hasn't played great, but Pickens hasn't either. So Diontae Johnson, they can move around, do the things they do with Christian Kirk, inside, outside, to scheme him open in Jacksonville. So I think both these guys are very similar. I'm not sure either will get into the end zone, but I think I could see either or both going over 80 yards.
Yeah. So Diontae Johnson's just been very, very steady, right? Since coming back, 79 plus yards in each game since returning. He is the Steelers wide receiver one, the top target, like we expected. So when he's healthy, it's just not going to be very many targets to go around to the rest of the guys. They're going to go to Diontae, and then the rest will be very inconsistent. When it comes to Christian Kirk, his matchup is just the best. I mean, the 49ers are allowing the third most fantasy points per game to just wide receivers this season, right? But they are particularly so incredibly terrible at covering the slot. Every single time there's a slot receiver, it doesn't matter their name, doesn't matter if they're good or bad, right? In general, bet on their over if they're going against the 49ers. But this week, Kirk will get to face Isaiah Oliver almost pretty much the entire game, you expect. Isaiah Oliver, prior to the 49ers bye, allowed the most yards and touchdowns in slot coverage among all quarterbacks from weeks 4 to 8 through per PFF. Like, Oliver's so incredibly bad. Christian Kirk should have had a huge game this week.
Yeah, it's a good call on both of these guys. And yeah, they're nice to have, right? You can feel good playing them, that you're going to get some good value. You're not going to have to force it and sweat it out here with them. You know they're going to be involved. And that's a good feeling sometimes when you have these guys versus those boomer bust receivers. Now, Davante Adams has been a bust here for a lot of the season. We're going to talk about where he's ranked. We didn't even bring him up in the first conversation here. So that should tell you that he's a little bit lower in the rankings in our next tier of wide receivers. Before we do that, we got to hear from one of our sponsors. That's DoorDash. Look, it's going to be a Thursday night football tonight, and we're going to sit back. Yes, we're going to watch the Bears Panthers because it's interesting, and we want to check out our props and our fantasy players, right? So we have to do that. And look, maybe we're going to be glued to our seat here. This is a close game that we expect between these two teams, seeing how Tyson Bagent and Bryce Young go to work here. And I'm down here in Carolina, so I figure there's going to be a lot of people in the Charlotte area sitting back watching their favorite team and getting some takeout and doing that. And maybe you need groceries and like, I don't want to go. It's almost time for kickoff. I want to tailgate in my own house and chill and watch a football game on Thursday night. Well, they can take care of you at DoorDash. You can just know that whether you need groceries or something from your local joint here, a lot of good stuff here just around the corner from me with pizza and wings. Wing King Cafe, shout out to them. They do a great job as one that's going to come through, or DD Packers. These are your go-to spots for wings in Charlotte. So if you're listening out there, this is a good time to get in on DoorDash because they'll take care of you doing Thursday night football. If you're in Chicago, same deal. I mean, you can get your Italian beefs and all that good stuff delivered to you. So just do that and go to DoorDash, and you can check back at DoorDash and get a very good value here. That's 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more with your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter the code LOCK23. Again, all you have to do is go download the DoorDash app. You can get 50% up to a $10 value. $15 or more is all you have to spend on your first order. All you have to do is Enter the promo code LOCK23, subject to change. Terms to apply. Again, LOCK23 for 50% off, up to $10 value in your first order with DoorDash, wherever they come from, wherever they deliver to you. All right, Michelle, it is time to continue here. I'm getting hungry thinking about what I'm going to DoorDash for the game to watch it locally here. But look, we're going to move on. And look, we want Davante Adams to be hungry in his matchup. Unfortunately, I don't know how much he's going to eat here, Michelle. It is a tough matchup against the Jets. Doesn't matter if it's Sauce Gardner or DJ Reed on the outside. Michael Carter, the other Michael Carter, is really good on the inside. I don't know. I haven't dumped all the way to wide receiver 27. I think you still play him. That's what I'm trying to say, is that even though you downgrade Davante Adams, you still want to play him as a wide receiver 3. You have him in the wide receiver.
I have him wide
range.
receiver 17. I just want to say I'm proud of you. I am proud of you.
Yeah.
I want to rank him at wide receiver 27. I do not think he will be a top 20 wide receiver this week. I'm going to end up moving him down. I'm just nervous because it's Davante Adams. It's the name. We know what he's capable of, right? But in this matchup with Aiden O'Connell, I just cannot picture it going well. I mean, 7 targets against the Giants last week with Aiden O'Connell turned into just 4 receptions, 34 yards. Each of the last 6 weeks, each of the last 5 weeks have been very disappointing for Davante Adams in fantasy. He has not been a top 20 wide receiver, not even close. So, yeah, I mean, it's so hard. The Jets are just such a good defense against wide receivers. I'm not expecting anything. I'm not playing Jacoby Myers, that's for sure.
No.
Davante Adams, you can't sit him, but it's not going to be pretty.
There's only 3 players you want to play from the Raiders right now in their offense: Josh Jacobs, and Josh Jacobs. I mean, that's what this is going to be more and more of. This is how you beat the Jets, right? These are 2 of the worst run defenses in the NFL, so you're going to see a lot of handoffs to Breece Hall and Josh Jacobs in this game. So I'm worried a little bit about Garrett Wilson on the other side for that reason, but I still like him a lot this week because the talent and the Raiders are not nearly as daunting in the secondary. But Davante Adams, yeah, what's also troubling, Michelle, he was very happy last week. He had a bad game, but he didn't complain one bit because there was no Josh McDaniels. They won. He was celebrating, having a cigar. So he's not even a squeaky wheel. He didn't complain. He was like, we're winning. I don't care. We're good. I'm good with this. So that's not good either, that he's not going to demand and pout about the ball. And that's good for him as a human being, but it's not necessarily good for us in fantasy football that he didn't complain more about not getting the ball. But again, you could be George Pickens when you do that as well. Courtland Sutton, looking at his matchup this week, he has a better matchup, I think, in that Bills game than Jerry Jeudy because you have Teron Johnson. He's their best corner left. He's a good inside-outside corner out of necessity here with some of their injuries, Tre'Davious White being on the shelf here. So I think now you see Courtland Sutton, he's really filling it with Russell Wilson the past few games. I think he's a guy you just play. I think I fade Jeudy. I think they were going to keep Sutton regardless, I think, of the trade deadline, and they did that. I think he's the key guy, and I think Russell Wilson is going to have to put up some passes in this game to keep up with Josh Allen. I think a lot of them are going to go Courtland Sutton's way.
Yeah, Courtland Sutton has caught a touchdown pass in 5 of the last 6 games, and Jerry Jeudy's not a playable asset. It doesn't mean he's never going to have good games, but I mean, you're never going to know when those happen. Don't play Jerry Jeudy. But Courtland Sutton is the wide receiver 1 for this offense. Russell Wilson seems to have a nice connection with him. He's catching the touchdowns like I thought he was going to do last year when I was high in Sutton coming into the year. Now it's finally happening this year. Week 8, he only had 2 receptions for 29 yards, but they didn't need a pass, right? They were beating up on the Chiefs. They really just wanted to run the ball and keep Patrick Mahomes off the field. They're just trying to run out the clock. I don't think they're going to have that scenario in Buffalo. Since it's actually played at Buffalo, the Bills will put up points. They're going to have to put up points. Really like Courtland Sutton this week. Talking about having to put up points, you're much higher on Calvin Ridley than I am. That's not a shocker. That's pretty much every week, right? You have him wide receiver 16. I'm at wide receiver 27. Likely the Jaguars are going to have to put up points against the 49ers if they get their, crap together, right? They were a little rough before the bye, but you envision the 49ers come in and put some points up on the board here. I don't love the matchup for Ridley because Travarius Ward will likely be on him, and Ward has not been great as of late, that's for sure. But I trust him more to pick it up, and Calvin Ridley could have a huge game, but I think this is more of a Christian Kirk game.
Yeah, as we mentioned with Trevor Lawrence and Brock Purdy, I just want everyone to go off in this game. Just keep throwing. Keep of course, Christian McCaffrey and Travis Etienne involved, but I want to see everyone go off in this game. And I think Calvin Ridley has a pretty good matchup still on the outside. As you mentioned, Ward has struggled. They're not great at the number 2 corner. So I think they'll also maybe scheme Ridley open a little bit better coming off the bye. That means maybe looking at him inside because he did play a good amount in the slot when he was with the Falcons. And I think that's maybe an underutilized skill set. If you can flip where you lie in Kirk and Ridley, that can get them to even better matchups. So, yeah, you have them where I have Davante Adams at wide receiver 27, which is interesting. I have him around where Adams is there. I just think there's going to be more points and more reason to like the Jaguars and 49ers putting up points in this game versus the Raiders and Jets. So that's why I have a Ridley pretty high. I think this could be a decent game, but I still think Christian Kirk has a better game. Now, Marquise Hollywood Brown is hard because we're not sure what we're going to get from Kyler Murray. It is an interesting matchup because there is A.J. Terrell, the Falcons. Now, he hasn't been totally shut down because DeAndre Hopkins was able to do something big time against Terrell, and we saw last week it wasn't all that great there against the Vikings as they let the comeback happen. So, look, Marquise Brown, he's got Kyler Murray back. That's great, but I don't know how much the Cardinals are going to maybe throw, right? I think maybe there'll be a little bit more running. We have to see what James Conner's status is. Look, I still think he's playable. I just have him a little bit lower than Michelle. He's actually got a good matchup, and the quarterback is back. So, look, you just have to expect that it may not be that explosive game. You just might have to settle for a floor here with Marquise Brown this week.
Yeah, I have him at wide receiver 19. So it's not like I'm incredibly high on him, just a lot higher than you at wide receiver 32, but you still have him as a viable flex play. I'm just saying, especially in PPR leagues, I think he has a great week. He's finished as a top 24 wide receiver in 5 weeks this season. So it's not like he's done nothing. And Brown has the 12th most targets among wide receivers this season. It's just unfortunately he's been playing with Josh Dobbs and Clayton Tune. So it hasn't turned into very many receiving yards. But like you said, Murray is back. Last year, we only had a 6-game sample size with these two without DeAndre Hopkins on the field. And it was great. Brown was averaging over 10 targets per game, over 80 receiving yards per game, and 18.3 fantasy points per game. So we saw greatness out of Brown in fantasy last year with Kyler Murray. I'm not sure that'll happen right away, but with so many guys on bye, he's pushed up a little bit, and I really like him this week. 2 other guys that were quite different on as well, and it's because they're inconsistent. It's Gabe Davis and Tank Dell. I have them both ranked, in the low 20s. I'm mid 20s. Like I'm excited to play them. You have them both ranked outside your top 35 wide receivers this week, so you're not trusting them. This is my thing with Gabe Davis. Real quick, I've decided I'm playing Gabe Davis in every single home game, and I am sitting him in every single away game. I don't care if he goes off and away. I'm sitting him for every single road game, playing him in every away or home game. He's averaging 17 fantasy points per game at home this year and only 4 on the road. His targets split in half on the road. His receiving yards per game is at 18 on the road and 72.2 at home. 4 touchdowns at home, only 1 away. And it's all because of Josh Allen's. I mean, if you look at Josh Allen's home road splits, they're insane. 13 touchdowns to 5 and 3 interceptions to 6. Like Josh Allen is not playing well on the road at all, but he's playing amazingly at home. And I think that correlates with Gabe Davis's production. And with Tank Dell, all this man does is put up 20 points when he's healthy. Get him in the game.
Yeah, here's going into it. I think, Pat Surtain too. I know he has not had the best game, but coming off a bye again, I think this Broncos defense has started to play better. If you look at the numbers of late, I mean, you throw out that Dolphins disaster. I think some things have improved for them on the back end, especially with Justin Simmons also back there roaming. So my problem with Gabe Davis is not necessarily his kind of his talent level in this matchup, but it's the way that they might attack them, right? I mean, there's a lot open in the middle of the field with Dalton Kincaid. You have Khalil Shakir and what he can do. So a lot of things going on with
Don't you think
this
that
team.
Surtain would be on Stephon Diggs, though?
I don't know if they would travel him too much. I think Diggs is a guy that can move around, right, out of it. Like if Davis is outside, I just don't think they'll necessarily force to target Davis, right? He disappointed actually last week. I think he had a chance to catch a touchdown. And again, he's a free agent, so they might be ready to move on. And Khalil Shakir and Dalton Kincaid, I think just the way they use these guys a little bit more. I mean, if you look at the Broncos, that's where they've been vulnerable, right? In the middle of the field quite a bit. So I think that's where they go. I think Gabe Davis is kind of also hurt by I think he's really good in a specific situation against zone, and he has to be the guy in a favorable matchup where these guys you can move around, and that's what the beauty of having those two inside receivers and Diggs is. So I just think, unfortunately, we didn't see Shakir and Kincaid having this meteoric rise in the middle of the season as usage, and I think that's what's hurting Davis more than anything else. So that's where I'm going away from Davis. And again, the matchup may not be good sometimes for him in this game. Now, Tank Dell, this is a pretty good secondary overall for the Bengals. They've been very nasty here overall with their pass rush and their corners. I mean, they go three deep too. Mike Hilton is good in the slot. You have Chidobe Wuzier, Cam Taylor-Britt. These are pretty good cover guys. So this is going to be tough to roam free. I mean, you didn't have Jamel Dean, and that was it. The Bucks secondary fell apart there. So I think Tank Dell gets contained this week. And I'm a little bit worried on the front end with the pressure on Stroud in the road game. And we know on the road, this offense is completely different.
Yeah. I don't expect Stroud to have a huge game at all. But I do think,
Yeah.
like, Nico Collins missed practice to an undisclosed, I don't know if it was injury or personal reason. Keep an eye on that. If he were to be out, that's even more targets for Tank Dell. But Dell is getting targeted. He's super impressive. And Stroud's going to put up at least 200 receiving or 200 passing yards, right? They have to go to someone. They can't run the ball. They're not going to run. They have to throw a ton. So I'm still completely fine with playing Tank Dell. I don't think it's going to be 100 receiving or 2 touchdown week again, but I could see 6 receptions, 80 yards, and a very viable start this week. Talking about like just a very comfortable start lately is Jahan Dotson. Is he just a weekly good start now? Like, not someone you are expecting to put up huge numbers every week, but getting the targets as of late, 8 targets or more in each of the last 3 games. And last 2 games, he's got a touchdown as well. Seahawks, not the best matchup, not too scary. They should have to throw a ton like they always do. Jahan Dotson, you just keep plugging in at this moment, right?
Yeah, I think the key here is seeing where the matchup might fall. You have Reek Woolen. He's probably going to look at Terry McLaurin. And then they have a rookie on the other side. He's been good at times, Devin Witherspoon, but he can also be toasted. And a very similar receiver when they had an opportunity. They didn't have to do much and throw to him at all. It was Zay Flowers, but he did have a ridiculous play that he had an opportunity against Witherspoon. So Dotson is similar, right? He's got some speed, some quickness on the outside that can have some damage here. So I do like it. I mean, we know that the Commanders are going to throw a ton because they can't run the ball. Their defense stinks. It's going to be like 50 passing attempts. So he
Yeah.
just needs to get, I mean, 9 to 10 of those targets, and he's going to come through. I mean, that's all you need, especially with Curtis Samuel hurting. There's some other developments here that are going in his favor. Mary McLaurin is contained a little bit. So Dotson, I think, finds the end zone again, and you play him as a wide receiver 3, and don't think about it too much. I think maybe the power's with him more than Gabe Davis at this point with someone we're starting every week.
Yeah, absolutely. And to finish off our show in the final segment, we'll get to the tight ends. I'm super excited because we each have 2 rookies sitting at the top of our tight end rankings. That's super rare and very exciting because we need that in the tight end market right now. But before we get to that, I want to talk about one of our sponsors, Jace Medical. We spend a lot of time talking together, you and I. We get fired up together on wins and losses, who to start, who to sit. I'm thankful for that connection we have. And today I want our chat to be a little more personal. Personal. Whether you're on extended travel, bracing for a major weather event, or limited by yet another supply shortage, you are covered, my friend. Thanks to our partners at Jace Medical, life-saving antibiotics and a long list of daily medications can be ordered in a 1-year supply. Even ED generics for Cialis, Viagra, Rivatio prescriptions. Go online right now at jacemedical.com to receive your 12-month supply on your daily medication. Remember to use promo code Locked On at checkout for a discount as well. A verified customer had this to say about Jace. I am thankful for this service. Supply chain issues caused me to cut pills in half to have it. I ordered most of my daily meds with a year's supply. I also ordered an antibiotic kit. I feel secure now. Prices are lower than local pharmacies. I highly recommend this for everyone. If you or someone you love would get some peace of mind by having a year's supply of any daily medication, go to jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com to see if it's offered for you. Remember to use promo code Locked On for $20 off your purchase. All right, getting to these tight ends here. I said at the end of last segment, we each have rookie tight ends at 1 and 2. Now they're different. You have Sam Laporta 1, Dalton Kincaid 2. I have Dalton Kincaid 1, Sam Laporta 2. But I'm so excited for these young guys. They are just balling out with their opportunities. And they each have fantastic matchups this week. The Broncos are allowing the second most fantasy points per game to tight ends this season for Dalton Kincaid facing them. And then Laporta's facing the Chargers, who are allowing the fourth most fantasy points to tight ends this year. Great matchups for both of them. I'm very excited to see what they do this week.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be involved quite a bit in their team's game plan. I mean, the matchups are just really darn good here this week where they're going to be schemed open. And look, we don't have Travis Kelce, so that opens the door for someone else to be number
Yeah.
one. And it's fun that we have Porta and Kincaid up there. And look, we were maybe feeling bad about tight end early in the season, but now we're absolutely loving it. This position has so much depth. Like, okay, I will notice that Travis Kelce is not playing, but I almost won't because there's just so many guys that you can play this week and that we're going to be happy about to watch this position soar. So ever since that National Tight End Day week, I mean, things have just been pointing up for this position. So we do have those two guys 1-2, but we also have another Dalton. This is first to have good Daltons here in our top 5. Dalton Schultz is on the radar here as our tight end 5. He went off last week. We know that against the Buccaneers. This week, he gets that beautiful matchup as well against the Bengals. So it's just Laporta, Kincaid in some order, then TJ Hawkinson, Mark Andrews, but then it's Dalton Schultz. You got to play him this week. I mean, he's going to be involved. I think it's more of a Schultz week. They're underneath. They're going to have to throw to him quite a bit. That's why the Bengals give it up, right? They have good corners, not that great of safeties. Their linebackers are weaker in coverage. So that's why everything is kind of funneled in the middle of the field. So that's really good for Dalton Schultz. And that's where CJ Stroud, as he's got him involved consistently, is going to go this week.
Yeah, Schultz is averaging the third most fantasy points per game among tight ends since week 5, behind only Travis Kelce and George Kittle. Now, we both have Schultz ranked over Kittle this week. We both have Kittle at 6, so not burying him, but
Yeah.
Deebo Samuel will be back. And with Deebo and Aiyuk on the field, we have yet to see Kittle have a good fantasy day, right? So, or I should say, yet to see him have a high receiving yard day with both of those guys on the field. So that's a little bit worrisome. But if you have George Kittle, you're playing him. But it is interesting. We're both ranking Schultz ahead of him. I think he's just safer. I mean, 60 plus yards and a touchdown in 3 of the last 4 games. He's getting the targets. And like you said, if the Bengals can cover those wide receivers, we're going to keep seeing those targets go to the tight end where they've had a lot of issues this year covering. So love that for him. Right after Kittle, so you go Schultz, then Kittle as your tight end 6. You have Jake Ferguson at tight end 7. I have him at tight end 9. I will say I'm not confident in him this week. The Cowboys get the Giants. Now, if he gets one of the first touchdowns of the game or, before they get up too high, then cool. But if they take an early lead really fast and he doesn't get one of the touchdowns, it might be a pretty poor day for him.
Yeah, I mean, that's the bottom line is let's hope it's a little bit competitive early to a Tommy DeVito on the other side. I don't have a lot of confidence, but if I'm going to say that they're going to have Jake Ferguson on the field, maybe a little bit of Luke Schoonmaker, I think this is an opportunity to line up in this type of formation, run the ball. I don't think they're going to have to spread the field and go nuts throwing. So, and CeeDee Lamb, other than him, there hasn't been a lot going on at wide receiver. It's kind of by committee week to week of that position. So Ferguson is going to be involved. I think we've realized that he's now established as a key target all over the field, kind of like Dalton Schultz was, right? For Dak Prescott, he's like throwing the tight end all the way going back to Hall of Famer Jason Witten there. So it's a position he's going to target. He's going to feel comfortable with. They're going to play off the run. Good chance that Tony Pollard has a big game to get them in the red zone. Jake Ferguson's been targeted well in that position. So I'm not going to say he goes 90 yards and give us that this week. He could drop down to 50, but he has a good chance to score this week. So I really like Jake Ferguson, just not just this week, but going forward.
Yeah. And another guy who's put up 2 touchdowns last week, Cole Kmet, not Cade Otton. So I'm not playing Cade Otton. I'll just put that out there. We're not really talking about him, but I'm not chasing those points this week. Not consistently targeted enough. But Cole Kmet has seen 18 targets over the last 2 weeks with Tyson Bagent. And we're going to get Bagent again tonight against the Panthers. Do I expect 2 touchdowns again? No, but 79 receiving yards, 55 receiving yards, 10 receptions, 6 receptions these last 2 weeks. You'll take that. And if he happens to get into the end zone, then that's just a plus.
Yeah, Cole Kmet, look, this number matchup says Cole Kmet is not a very good play tonight, but let's dive deeper into the Panthers. They don't have their safety Xavier Woods. Jeremy Chin is long gone. They're going to have to try to cover Cole Kmet with a linebacker, and that's not going to work very well. And I think with Tyson Bagent, he's going to be comfortable and just say, look, this is a guy that I trust other than DJ Moore all over the field. I mean, Darnell Mooney, it's kind of interesting that these other receivers have kind of popped up a little bit more with Tyson Bagent taking over, but maybe it's because he's not as needing to feed one person all the time, which is a good sign for a young quarterback. So Cole Kmet, again, he's a good red zone target. You've seen that from last year. He can explode or he can disappear. So keep that in mind. If they get too far ahead with the running game and Dante Foreman is racking up the rushing touchdowns and they do that, you don't want the game to go out of hand here. You want it to be somewhat competitive or even the Bears trailing. And then Komet is going to be involved with enough passing to score here. But look, he's just got too much upside. He can blow up for multiple TDs. He can make a big play downfield. So I like that. To top 10 for sure for both of us. I'm at 9, you have at 10.
Yeah, and then last up here of playable guys, right? We're not hitting on Evan Ingram. You have him, you're playing him. Taysom Hill has been nothing but fantastic. Get him into your lineups if you have him. But the last guy here where I feel pretty solid about, like Jonnu Smith's the guy I'm willing to plug in as well, but Trey McBride. So he has the huge week in week 8, right? And then just comes crawling back down to nothing in week 9. But that was pretty obvious, right? He was playing with Clayton Tune. That was the number one key. And then he had to face the Browns defense, who's just a super, super tough matchup for anybody, and especially tight ends. But now he gets the Falcons defense. They're giving up top 10 most fantasy points to tight ends this year. He gets back Kyler Murray. And, Murray last year was targeting Zach Ertz 7.6 times per game last season. We know Ertz isn't playing. He's on IR. So hopefully some of those targets go McBride way. And I think he's a very viable option. I don't think he has a huge week, but I think he's a viable option if you need someone to plug in.
Yeah, and he was a little bit involved last week. It was just a bad matchup against the Browns, and he had no quarterback play. This week, everything flips. He has a good matchup. He has a legitimate quarterback, so that's good. And there might ease Kyler Murray in, right? I don't know if they're going to force him to throw downfield all that much. Michael Wilson is also hurting at wide receiver, so there's not a lot, right? I mean, they haven't used Rondo Moore really that much. So after, you would say, Marquise Brown, I mean, Trey McBride has to be involved in the passing game. And look, the Falcons, I mean, they are okay. They've been okay against tight ends, but TJ Hawkinson really kind of exploited that last week. And I think McBride has that kind of body, right? I think he's a guy that you can get open. He's a good athlete here. So this is good for Trey McBride going forward. The arrow's pointing up here with Kyler Murray. And I think this Cardinals team is going to start looking a lot better offensively and win some games, especially if James Conner gets in there. So that's going to benefit everyone, all their assets. And Trey McBride should be quite involved, I would say. I think you're looking at 6 to 8 targets from him this week.
Yeah, and when Zach Ertz continues to be out, as long as he's out, like Trey McBride could see a Dalton Kincaid type rise here with Kyler Murray back. So definitely a guy, if you're not playing, then I want to keep him on my bench just to see, like, I don't want to drop him to waivers. I want to see what he becomes with now Murray back in the fold.
All right. Yeah. So that's our look at our wide receiver and tight end rankings for week 10. Things that stand out, things that we agree on, things that we see a little differently on, but trying to help you put together the best lineup no matter what here at those positions. Now, we'll help you look at some sleepers that are a little bit deeper down on the board and some flex plays that you can consider there on our final show of the week on Friday. We'll talk about some value players along the way as well that you could put in as DFS bargains. And of course, look at our prize picks of the week for week 10. We'll have all of that coming at you on Friday's show. Thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. We're part of Locked On Podcast Network, your fantasy team every day. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer.
And I'm Michelle Magdziuk. Bye, y'all.